So welcome to everyone and thanks for joining us today for our FASD Informed Practice for the Australian Alcohol and Other Drug Workforce online skill building workshop. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that everyone is coming from today, from all over Australia and our colleagues across the ditch in New Zealand. I'm here in the ACT on Ngunnawal country, and I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people who are the traditional custodians of the lands that I'm coming to you from today, but also extend that respect and acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the lands that everyone is on today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the continuing relationship and guidance that we receive from traditional custodians all over the country. So thank you. Before we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues at NOFASD Australia. So the development of the module that we're showcasing today was a joint project between AADC and NOFASD Australia. And so in the spirit of that, we have a team here today to present about it. So we actually launched the online module, the online training module that we're talking about today at the end of last year, and that has been live for some time, and we'll be sending through the link during the event today, and you'll also be receiving it via email after the event. But what we're doing today is doing a bit more of a deep dive. So we had a launch event at the end of last year, as I said, but what we want to do now is have a bit more of a deep dive, looking at case studies and looking at the operational aspects of how people in frontline positions can operationalise the stuff that's in this module. So that's what today's about, and welcome as we get into it. But before we kick off, I would like to introduce my colleague Sophie Harrington, who is the CEO of NOFASD Australia, who's the other most excellent organisation who has developed this online resource with us. So Soph, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words about this?
Indeed. Thank you, Mel, and welcome everyone. I have the good fortune to be coming from 𝐏𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 today, so based in Perth and in the area called Midland, which is the Noongar name is 𝐼𝐻𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿. So welcome everybody, and yeah, delighted you could all be here. We've got so many people here virtually for today's skill building workshop. So NOFASD Australia, for any of those of you who aren't fully across who we are and what we do, the extended version of our name is the National Organisation for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders. We're Australia's peak body supporting individuals and families living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or perhaps the term you're more familiar with, FASD, and it's easier for me to say repetitively. NOFASD promote awareness, prevention, diagnosis and improved outcomes for those affected by FASD. So we were founded by families over 25 years ago now. Families who were lost to understand why this brain and body disability received so little support or acknowledgement anywhere. And in many cases, medical and other allied health professionals had not heard of the term and didn't know the disability. But let's fast forward 25 years and talk more positively. And FASD has been recognised by the Australian Government Department of Health, Disability and Ageing and the NDIS as extremely prevalent disability, which affects nearly 4% of the main population base. And that's a conservative estimate in Australia, which was published in 2025. So for this reason, over the last decade, the government has invested in strategic plans tied to effective actions. From this investment, many valuable initiatives have evolved, including the National Helpline, which is operated by NOFASD Australia, as well as world-class diagnostic clinics, and the recent establishment of a Centre of Research Excellence spearheaded by distinguished Professor Elizabeth Elliott of the University of Sydney, one of Australia's leading FASD experts. So despite this progress, FASD does remain widely misunderstood. Many individuals are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and some population groups experience disproportionately high rates of FASD that have historically gone unrecognised. For the alcohol and other drugs workforce, this means that unrecognised FASD is present among clients every day. And being alert to the possibility of FASD and understanding how it may present in people experiencing harmful substance use is a crucial first step toward improving outcomes. Today, as Mel said, is a practical introduction and overview of our comprehensive FASD Informed Practice for the Australian Alcohol and Other Drug Workforce online course. That's a mouthful. You will gain foundational knowledge about FASD, including what it is, how it commonly presents in AOD settings, and why recognising its impacts is essential for effective client support. It will also highlight key elements of FASD Informed Practice, such as screening considerations, adapting your approach, and building connections with external services to support in your practice. And we will equip you with knowledge you can apply immediately with your work. So it's a really practical session today. Thanks to funding received through FARE, that's the Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education, and the Australian Government Department of Health, Disability and Ageing, we are very proud of Australia's first FASD Informed online training course tailored for the alcohol and other drug sector. And we are deeply grateful for the collaboration and sector expertise provided by AADC and the Expert Reference Group, whose contributions have helped ensure the course is relevant and impactful for the Australian AOD workforce. So without further ado, thank you all for joining us today as part of our broader mission to improve outcomes for people affected by FASD, and in particular for those who may have FASD and are currently experiencing alcohol or drug dependence. Our free national helpline number operates 365 days a year, providing information, support to families, individuals, clinicians and service providers. And you will have seen the numbers come up in the chat periodically. And whether you're seeking guidance, resources, training, or simply someone to talk to, our team is here to help. Thank you again, Mel and AADC, for hosting us today. And I'll hand over to you and to Simone and James. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Really appreciate you coming along and giving that context to today's workshop as well. Really appreciate that. Thank you. So without further ado, we're going to kick this off. So what we're going to do today is try and learn some more about FASD in an AOD service context and help people to build their confidence in working with people who have either been diagnosed with FASD or who might have suspected FASD. So we're going to hear from, firstly, Simone McKenry from NOFASD Australia, who was integral in developing this online module, and then from James Dunne, who is AADC's Policy and Project Coordinator as well. But as Sophie said, we also want to acknowledge and thank the project reference group that was made up of people working in the AOD sector across Australia and helped us to build the case studies that are included in this module. So thank you for keeping it real and making this applicable in a broad sense. And while we did develop it specifically with the AOD sector in mind, because obviously we're AADC, we do recognise the engagement that the module has received so far from adjacent sectors. So people working in custodial settings, people working in community services, in care and protection, people working in broader health settings. There's kind of something in this for everyone, in that it's a bit of an introduction to the kind of things that might present in service delivery and what you might need to know in terms of adapting your approach, whether that be as an individual person working with those that may or may not have FASD, or as an organisation looking to adapt your models of care and practice to be more inclusive of people with FASD. So Simone, I'm going to let you kick this off and get into the guts of this, I guess. Thanks, Simone.
Thanks, Mel. I'll just set up my screen. Hang on, what's happening here? Display settings. Okay, can we all see me good? Fantastic. Thanks, Mel. As Mel mentioned, my name is Simone McKenry. I'm Project Support Officer for NOFASD Australia, and I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. Today, I'll be presenting a bit of an overview of FASD, and then we'll look at some examples of how it might present in your service, followed by some information on where you can, and individuals and families can access support for FASD. We'll be discussing some content today that might be triggering for some people, so I want you to prioritise your wellbeing and please seek out a trusted person or one of these services on the screen. So what is FASD? Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder is a diagnostic term used to describe the impacts on the brain and body of individuals prenatally exposed to alcohol. FASD is a lifelong condition, and individuals with FASD will experience some degree of difficulty in their daily living and need support with things like motor skills, physical health, learning, memory, attention, communication, emotional regulation, and social skills to reach their full potential. Each individual with FASD is unique and has areas of both strengths and challenges. So what causes FASD? FASD is caused by alcohol exposure during pregnancy. Alcohol is a neurotoxin and teratogen that is a known agent to cause birth defects and permanent brain injury in fetuses. Alcohol passes freely through the placenta and can cause harm to the developing baby at any time during pregnancy. So FASD is more common than you think. FASD is the leading cause of non-genetic learning and neurodevelopmental disabilities worldwide, estimated to impact approximately 1% of the general worldwide population. And as Sophie mentioned, in recent research, with combined data on alcohol use during pregnancy and the known factors of FASD in Australia, to estimate the national prevalence of 3.64%. So that means that there's approximately one child in every Australian classroom that may be impacted by FASD. And as we can see from this infographic here, FASD is much more common than a lot of other conditions, yet it remains undiagnosed and under-recognised. FASD often goes unnoticed due to stigma, lack of screening and limited professional training. So why FASD and AOD commonly intersect? So the rates of substance use and the need for treatment are often higher among people living with FASD due to a range of factors, including brain-based differences, experiences of trauma, and gaps in support systems, which result in missed opportunities for diagnosis or early intervention. Individuals with FASD are at higher risk of experiencing trauma due to life experiences, intergenerational factors, and brain-based challenges. When people living with FASD access AOD services for support, their brain-based differences can contribute to difficulties engaging in and remaining connected to treatment. Individuals with FASD may experience challenges such as trouble planning, sequencing, remembering, difficulty understanding abstract concepts or complex information, sensory sensitivities, or impulsivity, which increases their vulnerability to substance use. AOD services plays an important part in educating people, parents and caregivers about the risks associated with alcohol use and during pregnancy. So for these reasons, we have adapted and developed an online course that supports the AOD workforce in recognising FASD and supporting people within your service. So James and I will be providing a deep dive into selected modules from the FASD Informed Practice of the Australian Alcohol and Other Drug Workforce online course. And this course really guides you through a series of modules that provide comprehensive information about FASD, impacts on individuals, how it impacts on individuals, and how to apply that knowledge across different stages of treatment, so from entry right through to post-treatment. And it also offers practical guidance and support in the development of FASD-informed practices in your service. So I'm going to look at one of the modules, which is called Consideration of Brain-Based Differences. And as previously mentioned, people living with FASD have brain-based differences that can increase their risk of AOD-related harm and can make it harder to engage with and benefit from AOD treatment. Every person is unique and may show uneven cognitive abilities across their lifespan. The strengths and challenges may not match their chronological age, and what looks like won't do or is actually often can't do without support. And when we understand why these behaviours occur, we can respond to in effective ways and improve engagement and treatment outcomes. When supporting people with FASD, you might need to reframe the behaviours you observe, and you can come up with creative problem-solving approaches. I'm going to walk you through some examples of how these differences might show up in your service, focusing on why you might see them and what you can do to support them. It's important to note that these strategies also benefit individuals experiencing similar challenges even without a FASD diagnosis. So the first one is what you might see is say they understand and agree to a plan but don't follow through. So an example of this, you might sit someone down, go through a plan for the week. You might say attend a session, maybe complete some paperwork, but then they don't show up to the session and they don't complete the paperwork. So why might this be happening? Could be impaired impaired communication skills, so they may have barriers to putting their thoughts and feelings into words. They may have barriers attending to or processing what's being said to them. They may have difficulty processing that, higher level of information or abstract learnings. So they may not comprehend despite responding that they've actually understood. And they agree because they want to do the right thing, not because they've fully understood. There could be executive function challenges. So they might have trouble initiating a task or ordering and sequencing a task. There also might be memory and attentional challenges, so they might have difficulty focusing or holding the information and recalling the information when they need it. They could also have some physical challenge that may be unnoticed or unaddressed. So they could have hearing or vision issues or motor skill issues. So it's important to think about those physical conditions as well that might be playing a role. What you can do about it is some of the things like adjusting language and communication. So it might be some simple step-by-step instructions, really short, simple information, giving lots of examples, present information in different ways. So might give them the verbal, but back it up with some visual support, some written information. Provide additional processing time and repeat and clarify information. A really important one is checking for understanding. As I mentioned, they may acknowledge that they've understood something, but they actually may not have. So it's important that you might get them to do that in their own words, or get them to demonstrate it to you in a way if they can. So and constantly, checking in constantly to just double check that they have understood what you're asking them to do. Collaborate with professionals, so find out about those physical conditions. They may have a motor skill challenge that might be impairing their handwriting, so they might not be able to fill out the paperwork that they've been asked to fill out. Include family and support people as with consent, to do things like attend appointments, remind them of appointments, help consolidate information, and help maybe fill out some paperwork. The next one we look at is trouble remembering new information even after it was just presented. And this could be that the treatment program rules have been presented to them, and then almost immediately after those rules have been presented, they've actually broken one of the rules. Why might we see this happening? There could be quite memory challenges, so they may have trouble holding the information and storing that information and then recalling it. They may have trouble with working memory and difficulty holding onto that information long enough while they're actually doing the task. They maybe have verbal memory challenges where they're having difficulty remembering things that have been said to them, and also using new learnings. So they might have trouble using that learning in different settings, so generalising that information, and also executive functioning challenges. They might have find it hard to plan, organise or keep track of what needs to be done, and those attentional issues, they could have trouble with staying focused or keeping attention while in a conversation or doing a task. So what can we do about it? We can reduce and remove some of the reliance on memory, so where possible. So we might need to back conversations up with written information, or provide lots of copies of information for their, their room, for to take home or to have in a setting, so that they've got lots of opportunities to have some visual supports to back up the information. What else? Then we might do regular check-ins again, double checking they've understood, sort of prompting and providing extra information around maybe rules or whatever information you're trying to get across. Completing a task with an individual, they do a lot better when they're shown something than actually being told to do something. They often have that strength of being hands-on, and repetition really helps. So lots of reminders and information sharing whenever you can, and checking in with them what works. They might have some strategies and supports that help support their memory challenges or executive functioning challenges or attention challenges. Okay, so the next one is exhibiting behaviours that would be expected from someone much younger than them. So this might be some simple daily living tasks, something simple as brushing their teeth. They may have a lot of trouble actually doing it when you would expect that at their age that they should be able to follow the process of brushing their teeth. And this could be due to adaptive skills. So their daily living skills, they might have gaps and lack the ability to follow through on those daily living tasks. And it's important to remember that it's not intentional. It's not that because they're being lazy or unmotivated. It's really that they just don't have those skills to function in that task. There could be dysmaturity where their chronological age and their developmental or emotional age doesn't match. So those skills don't match their actual age. So you see there's some behaviours and skills that might be a lot younger than they actually are, or maybe older than they are. So what can we do about this? We can set some reasonable goals that are consistent with the individual's actual abilities. So checking to see that they've actually got the skills to complete that task or what you're asking them to do. Using simple, concrete information. Teach them to generalise across different contexts, and providing step-by-step instructions with those visual supports as well. And that's regular check-in and maybe some one-on-one mentoring to help them through that task. Also providing sort of a daily sort of structure and routine can really help consolidate and help the individual learn those skills. The last one we're going to look at is yelling at treatment staff and or other clients, aggressive or threatening behaviours. So you might be in a group session and all of a sudden they start yelling at others and storm out of the room without explanation. So why you might see this is the individuals with FASD often have a vulnerability to stress due to their brain-based differences. Things like emotional and physical trauma could also contribute to that vulnerability to stress. They might have a poor understanding of social cues, so they might have trouble reading body language, facial expressions or tone, misinterpret jokes or sarcasm. They may have difficulty regulating their emotions, or maybe have language difficulties where they haven't learnt to communicate. They've learnt to communicate through behaviours rather than using their words. Difficulty regulating their sensory input, such as noise, light, sounds, tastes, smells. They could have a mood disorder, an anxiety disorder, or other mental health challenges that may be actually contributing to those behaviours. And also substance use can exacerbate those existing emotional and behavioural dysregulation. So the things that we can do to support them are maybe exploring ways that they might be feeling uncomfortable in that environment. So it might be checking in on whether they feel overwhelmed with, large groups or noise or certain, light levels in the room. It might be looking at individual versus group sessions where possible. It really looking at understanding the function of the behaviour. So, why is this behaviour happening? Are they scared? Are they overwhelmed? Is it impulsive, behaviour? Help them identify and use really effective coping strategies, and learn how to recognise the signs in them. So if you start seeing them to get agitated, maybe sort of intervene early and sort of let them have a break or, do some sort of relaxation techniques. Teach the individual to identify and communicate when they're upset. So some skill building can really help, and make a plan together on, when they're feeling dysregulated, some things that they can do. It might be stepping out. It might be going to speak to somebody. So you don't need a diagnosis to support someone with FASD. when we adapt things like communications, environments, expectations and approaches, we can really create spaces of, for engagement and success. So where do you find information about FASD services and what's available for diagnosis in your states or support for family and individuals living with FASD? So you can go to NOFASD Australia. We've got a helpline, as Sophie mentioned, that runs 365 days a year. And we can advise you on useful resources. We can provide you with contact details of services. We also have a website which has specific information and resources for the alcohol and other drug services. You can also sign up for our newsletter to get more up-to-date information on research and new information around FASD. There's also the FASD Hub, which also has services that has a directory of FASD informed services and resources on their website. For any further information on the course or other support information, you can contact me on support@fasd.education. And I'm going to close off my slideshow and hand over to James.
Just in a minute, I'm going to introduce James for you, Simone. I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping in between, if that's okay. So Simone stuff, I think everyone's getting the vibe here. Like it's really practical stuff, like things like putting up reminder signs, stuff that anyone can do. And as Simone sort of said, you don't necessarily need a diagnosis of FASD to be able to do these really simple adaptations at a service delivery level. But if you do think that someone needs screening and a diagnosis, that's what the last slide was about. You can get more advanced help and specific help from NOFASD Australia for particular situations and contexts. Now, the other thing we're going to do is keep putting more information up in the chat throughout the webinar. So the crisis and support contacts you're going to see again. We're going to put up some resource links. Later, we're going to put up a survey to see if you found this event helpful and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to use the chat for. But what we want you to do is punch questions into the Q&A box. So you can't use the chat to put up questions. Please instead use the Q&A. And after James's presentation, we're going to go to audience questions and let you pop in any questions you have about what Simone and James have presented, or case studies you want us to work through in terms of giving tips, any of that sort of stuff. You can start punching your questions into the Q&A whenever you would like. The other thing that we're able to do is you can comment on questions. So yeah, I want to know about that too, or upvote the questions so that we can get a sense, if we don't have enough time, of which ones are most pressing for people. So that's just the housekeeping. And now I'm going to throw to James Dunne, who's going to talk a little bit more following on from Simone's presentation and give a little bit more detail. But I think you're getting the gist of this. This is really practical stuff, and you don't need to be a clinical expert in FASD to be able to make some of these adaptations in your daily work. Thanks, James. Take it away.
I'll just share my screen and my slides. There we go. Hopefully that's come up now. So yeah, thanks. As Mel said, my name is James Dunne and I'm the Policy and Projects Coordinator for AADC, and I'm coming to you from the lands of the Pangarang people in northeast Victoria. So I think Simone's given us a really fantastic overview of what FASD is, how it impacts people, and where we can go for that support if we encounter somebody that thinks they might have FASD, or if we want to make those referrals, or just get some of that additional support resources. But in my presentation today, I'm going to look at what does FASD look like in a specific AOD setting. So we know that testing and assessment is expensive and scarce in Australia, and that means that there's likely to be a cohort of people in our services that have undiagnosed FASD, as we've mentioned a couple of times already in our discussion today. So in my presentation, I'm going to take us through a section of the module that looks at screening for FASD. And it's really important to note that, as we've emphasised, that this is not about diagnosing FASD. It's about recognising some of the indicators that FASD could be present and how we might adapt our work for the possibility of FASD, or even any other cognitive or neurological disability, which might mean that our traditional ways of working with clients need some adaptation. But first, I think Simone went through a few of these impacts and how FASD might present. So I won't go through this slide in a lot of detail, but I do want to place ourselves in an AOD context and see how FASD might actually impact a person's behaviour. So firstly, people with FASD can be very impulsive. So in our settings, that might mean that somebody has difficulty saying no to a substance that they've been offered. They might have difficulty planning and maintaining choices that support their safety and well-being, like, for example, not using alone, not staggering use, not having naloxone nearby. So this makes the implementation of harm reduction information and harm reduction practices really challenging. People with FASD also experience a high sensitivity to stress. So in our context, this might result in a person using substances to cope with a situation that they interpret as being very stressful in their life. FASD also affects judgment. So somebody living with FASD might have difficulty identifying or avoiding people that don't appreciate their vulnerability, or having difficulty predicting and avoiding high-risk situations where substances might be present. As we've mentioned, FASD also impacts memory. So a person might have difficulty recalling that harm reduction information that they've learned. And sometimes when they've learned this information many, many times over, or they might have difficulty recalling about how much of a substance is safe to use. And finally, FASD affects our comprehension, and it might present itself as an inability for a person to understand, plan, or implement the strategies that promote their health and well-being, or understand that their tolerance for certain substances might drop after a period of abstinence, for example, if they've undergone residential treatment. So this overview gives some insight into how FASD might present in our services and with the people that we work with, but I think it also highlights some of the challenges in identifying FASD amongst a whole host of other issues that the people that come into our services might be experiencing. I'm sure we've all had clients who, for example, increase their substance use in response to periods of stress or associate with peers who might lead them into unsafe situations. So importantly here, I think it's about the combination of these multiple issues in each of these domains which might provide an indicator of FASD alongside the presence of prenatal alcohol exposure. So it's not one single issue or example that I've listed above, but you might observe these things in combination, and it might just be that little light bulb that suggests, hang on, something's going on here. Why does this person keep displaying these particular behaviours? But is there a way that we can systematise this? So again, there's no perfect science to this, but in this next part, I'm going to take us through a case study and a screening tool that might assist for screening for FASD. So at present, there's no validated tools that are suitable to support FASD screening in an AOD setting in an Australian context or a New Zealand context. However, the screening resource that's developed by NOFASD Australia does provide a number of useful prompters and considerations which may indicate the possibility that a client has FASD. So these prompters and considerations could be adapted by a service to fit its client cohort and the context of its service provision, and they could be applied in a way that is culturally safe. And it's really important to note that any changes to existing practices, such as amending screening tools, that really needs to be done in consideration of your organisation's governance system and your processes for practice improvements. So I've got the resource up on the screen now, and I won't read this out verbatim, and we'll circulate the resource to you later, and you can also find it in the module. And also note here that although we're talking about this resource in the context of screening for AOD screening in AOD services, you could also use these prompters as part of the work that you're doing with clients that are already in your service. So the first question at the top here asks, can you confirm or provide reliable evidence that you were prenatally exposed to alcohol? So there's a few considerations with this question. I'm just going to set that aside for a second. We're going to circle back to that first question at the end. But if we step through some of these other domains, it really reflects what some of those issues that Simone was talking about in her presentation. And these could be adapted into appropriate screening questions for your service. Like, does a person feel like it takes them a long time to learn a new skill? Do they have difficulty planning their time or organising themselves or learning it or staying focused? Do they feel like they're forgetful or have trouble paying attention? Do they have trouble with fine motor skills like doing up buttons or gross motor skills like riding a bike? Do they have any diagnosed learning disabilities like dyslexia? Do they have trouble regulating their emotions? Or do they become overwhelmed at different sensory inputs like sights and smells or sound, and they become overwhelmed with those feelings? Do they have challenges with self-care, remembering to shower, pay bills, buy food, or even cook? These are just some of the challenges that people with FASD may experience, and adapting screening tools to include these considerations may help give an indicator of the presence of FASD. Importantly, however, you may need to return to these screening questions at regular intervals in your work with clients, or even record your observations alongside that person's response. So people with FASD have often developed very good coping behaviours to help them navigate the world and mask the experience of having FASD. So these coping behaviours might present as guessing the response that they believe that a person is looking for, or mimicking or paraphrasing statements to imply they've understood a concept. And that can mean that the indicators of FASD could be missed. So now let's return to that question that was at the start of the resource, as it's really key that the behaviours that we've just discussed occur in tandem with that prenatal alcohol exposure. So to remind you of that question, it was, can you confirm or provide reliable evidence that you were prenatally exposed to alcohol? So this is a really challenging question to ask a person. It requires a lot of nuancing and thought around its appropriate application. There's a significant amount of stigma associated with FASD and parental alcohol consumption and prenatal alcohol exposure, and clients might feel anxious about discussing these topics. In addition, for some, those difficult relationships with parents or traumatic childhood experiences may contribute to a reluctance or a distress at discussing the behaviours of their parents and caregivers. And even where difficult relationships with parents are not present, the stigma of FASD and prenatal alcohol exposure can negatively impact relationships where blame could be ascribed for FASD on a parent. This has the potential to act as a risk factor for family and domestic violence for parents, but particularly for birth mothers. Others might simply not understand the connection between their own substance use and that of their parents. So it's important to reassure clients that many women who do not know that alcohol is harmful during pregnancy, and that women may not have known they were pregnant at the time of consuming alcohol. Or for some women who have a dependency, they might not be able to reduce or stop their drinking without support, and these supports are often not available to them in a timely and informed way. Lived and living experience tells us as well that women who do choose to disclose alcohol consumption to a health professional are often advised to simply stop drinking, which is not always possible. So all these factors may contribute to a client reluctance or distress when responding to FASD screening questions. But there are ways that we can help this process, such as having our person-centered conversations beforehand to ensure that people feel comfortable, building trust and rapport, and not placing judgment on an individual or their birth parents or making them feel like they've done something wrong in some way. We can normalise the conversation by explaining the purpose of the question, such as, we ask everyone this question to help better understand your support needs. Using open-ended questions or non-confrontational language like, would you feel comfortable sharing information about your family's alcohol use? We can watch for signs of discomfort and be prepared to pause or redirect the conversation, and being conscious of stigma related to FASD and prenatal alcohol exposure, and addressing feelings of blame if they arise in the client, and watching out for any potential risks, particularly for birth mothers, that might be associated with these feelings. And we can be prepared to answer questions about FASD, like you're all coming along to this session today to learn more about FASD, and we can provide supports for a person if they think they have FASD, or the other sorts of supports they might need around alcohol and substance use during pregnancy. And we can also obtain consent from the individual, for example, prior to using the screening tool, before we share information with other staff, and as well as before we may make any assessments for referrals. So let's work through a brief case study to see this question in action. So Shane works in a community-based AOD service, and his service has used the NOFASD Australia screening resource and adapted it into their intake processes. Shane meets a new client, Jackson, for his first intake interview. Jackson attends the appointment with his uncle Gary. Jackson is 24 and he spent most of his life in the care of his uncle and aunt. His dad died when he was 2, and he has a difficult relationship with his mum. Jackson has come to the service through a court-ordered diversion after being arrested and charged for a possession of a personal use amount of methamphetamine. Through the documents provided by the court, Shane learns that Jackson has been using illicit drugs and drinking alcohol since he was 14, and now he regularly uses cannabis, methamphetamine, and alcohol. He left school at 16 and began a mechanics apprenticeship. However, he dropped out after a year as he struggled to complete the TAFE coursework. Jackson has also attempted to live independently. However, he's been evicted from 2 different properties as he has difficulty managing money and often falls behind on rental payments, and he also struggles to keep the properties to a level of cleanliness deemed acceptable by his real estate agents. And after each eviction, he's returned to live with his uncle and aunt. Jackson is talkative throughout the intake process. However, he becomes silent and quickly becomes angry when Shane asks about alcohol and whether Jackson's mum or dad consumed alcohol when he was growing up. I don't know if they're drinking. What does my parents' drinking have to do with any of this? Jackson asks. He gets up to leave, but he sits back down when Gary explains that Shane is just trying to get to know him and what's going on in his life. Shane apologises for making Jackson upset and validates his feelings by saying that it's totally normal to feel this way when a stranger is asking personal questions. Shane also apologises for not explaining why he was asking these questions and not asking if it was okay to discuss alcohol in Jackson's family. Shane says that these questions are ones that he asks every new client and explains that understanding how alcohol is used by family members helps Shane understand what Jackson's childhood was like and how he can best help. Jackson nods and appears to relax and says that it was so long ago he doesn't really know if either of his mum or dad drank when he was living with them. Gary says, "You remember that time your mum got busted by the booze bus? You and me had to walk home while your auntie went with your mum to the police station. You must have been 4 or 5, I reckon." Jackson nods. "Oh yeah, you got me some Maccas on the way back. That was a bloody long walk for a little kid." Shane uses this anecdote to explore Jackson's mum's drinking further. After the intake interview finishes, Shane makes a note in Jackson's file that 2 of the intake screening questions were positively responded to, and the information from the court documents indicates a possibility of FASD. Shane also notes that he will implement the new FASD screening tool at a later date through observation of Jackson's behaviour and asking Jackson the screening questions. Shane does this so he can make his own judgment about the possibility of FASD and understand where he might need to adapt his practice to best support Jackson. So why do we do this? Why do we want to become more FASD informed in our practice, or why do we want our services to become more FASD aware in their policies? So firstly, being FASD aware may help us get better outcomes for the people who come through our doors. As we've explained today, the brain-based differences that many people with FASD experience mean that our traditional ways of working, which often rely on memory, for example, may be less effective, or there's a range of other issues happening in a person's life related to their FASD that might also impact on the way that we're working with them. So being FASD aware means that we can apply these person-centered principles that we all already work by. We can build relationships and rapport that acknowledges the possibility of FASD and the way that it shapes a person's life. And we can modify our practices in a way that responds to their strengths and the way that they process information. And the module explores these practice adaptations in significantly more detail, as Simone showed in her presentation. And secondly, being FASD aware means that we can screen and identify where it might be useful to refer a client for FASD assessment or for additional allied supports where formal assessment isn't possible. The impact of this recognition can be significant, and I'm going to finish my presentation today with a short video that highlights how being FASD aware can have a significant impact on someone's life. I'm just going to share this short video. Hopefully that's come up.
Jeffrey Taylor grew up in a troubled home.
I was only 16 years old and they threw me to the streets.
He's been in and out of prison since he was a teenager for offences ranging from reckless driving to armed robbery. He had 3 sons with his wife at the time, Julie, but when he went to jail, she had to raise their children on her own.
Yeah.
And my smoke cigar.
Oh, you got the smoke cigar.
Are you serious?
More money in there.
Yeah.
Their oldest son is calling from prison.
You'll have to buy a packet of smokes off someone, is that what you're saying?
Jeffrey regrets not being a better father and husband.
So what do? Send some money.
It's now been 2 years since Jeffrey got out and 1 year since the diagnosis that changed his life. His doctor found he had Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, or FASD.
There was a reason why I was like that. There was a reason why I was making those poor choices in the course of my life.
The neurodisability can affect emotional regulation and an ability to understand consequences.
You try and explain yourself and he won't comprehend what you're saying. He'll only see what he's saying.
Jeffrey was always known as a menace. He was angry at life and resentful of authority. He regrets his life of crime, but both he and his family wonder why he wasn't diagnosed earlier. The Inspector of Custodial Services has previously highlighted that WA prisons have inadequate screening processes for cognitive disorders. The Department of Justice says it's working to improve that situation, but across Western Australia, less than half of the state's prisoners have been screened for functional impairment. And that figure is even worse at the state's only juvenile prison. Only a third of inmates have been screened at Banksia Hill.
What's happened in the past doesn't sadden me, but what saddens me is the fact that we can change what's happening with these young people around us today. And the ones that don't share, they've got nothing. They're going to turn into an adult criminal like I am, or was.
Jeffrey's diagnosis prompted him to seek help.
When Jeff had finally come to understand his diagnosis, there was something tangible that he could understand about his life experience.
I think I'm doing good. Yeah.
Jeffrey attends counselling sessions like this one.
By having that awareness, we can pull it up a lot quicker.
It's a safe space for people struggling with substance abuse.
I knew that I was going to have a bad day, so that's why I come take the solid grains.
The therapeutic approach to helping those at risk is an example of what some are hoping to see more of in prisons.
It starts off with us as individuals, having empathy towards people that don't have what we might have, what we take for granted, someone else may not have.
I'll leave them up there the same photo.
Jeffrey says the support he received after his diagnosis has helped him escape a life behind bars. Now he hopes others can too. 𝐏𝐫𝐻𝐿, ABC News.
We can see the impacts that being FASD informed and being open to the possibility that somebody coming through our doors has FASD, and what the impact on those people's lives. We see in Jeff's story that at some point someone thought, hang on, let's get you assessed for FASD, and the subsequent positive impact that referral has had. And remember that our role as AOD workers is not to be FASD experts or to diagnose FASD, but the nature of FASD and its intersection with AOD use means that people with FASD will enter our services and we can possibly change the trajectory of someone's life. So I'll finish up here. As Simone and I have said, there's a huge amount of information resources in the module, and it covers a lot of different parts of our work, from harm reduction to referrals and supports to engaging and re-engaging and considering FASD from an intersectional lens. The full module goes for about 4 hours, and it would be amazing if you could step through every section of that module, but we know people are time poor, but there's still a lot of information in there that you could step through that's just relevant to your work and pick out those bits that are most useful to you. So I'll finish up there. Thank you.
Thanks, James. That's awesome. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, but we're going to have about 10 minutes to address questions. So if I can get everyone to go to the Q&A, because we have had some champions in there answering some of the questions as we go. So thank you to Sophie Harrington, who you saw earlier, and thank you also to Louise Gray, who is the former CEO of NOFASD Australia and now an advisor to NOFASD Australia, who have been punching in some answers as we go along. So some of those are there already. But I just want to go, Simone and James, I'm going to pick through some of these. We might not get through all of them, but I'm going to try and bundle some up here. And I'm also going to have a crack at some too as we go through. So Casey, your question is, if FASD is diagnosed, are clients eligible for the NDIS? Short answer is yes. Longer answer is it's a lot more complicated than that. So yes, this is one of the reasons why you might want to refer someone for an assessment. As James and Simone have indicated, you can adapt your practice to probably make services more inclusive for individuals who potentially have FASD and may or may not have a diagnosis. But there are reasons, exactly like Casey's flagged, why someone might want or need to be referred for an assessment to get some more support. But the challenge is going to be that it's not just the assessment. NOFASD Australia and the FASD Hub can help you identify a clinician. But once you have that diagnosis, the person's also going to need assistance to do an application to the NDIS. They're going to need assistance to be engaged with the process if they do get an NDIS positive application on their NDIS. So they're going to need help to engage with the care planning. They're going to need help to engage with a support coordinator. So you can see how there are multiple barriers along the way, and they're also going to be needing help to engage with services that don't necessarily have experience with people who use AOD. So this is a big question for me because I've been through this with a family member, and I can tell you that even if you get through all the hurdles I just spoke about, the difficulty we certainly had with our family member was that many disability services were not accustomed to dealing with the kind of behaviours and AOD use that we were having to support someone with. And so we really needed a lot of assistance to be able to help with that. So that's why we're giving you these resources, but also letting you know that there are organisations like NOFASD Australia there who you can, when you get to the phone a friend stage where you need some more specific assistance, they can step in and help you with particular cases. But yes, NDIS access is a possibility, but it's not the be all and end all. But it certainly can play an important role in providing additional supports and through care to people when they're leaving either AOD settings or custodial settings. Certainly having an NDIS plan and that money available to pay for supports like occupational therapy, psychologists, that sort of stuff, really can smooth those transitions for people. So in some instances, it really is worth pursuing. Couple of technical questions here. Are there any resources for setting up a FASD screening in an AOD service setting? Well, the stuff that James has just talked about in terms of the online workforce module that we've talked about, that'll give you some of the, it's not a clinical screening, but it's a kind of help you decide whether someone might need to be referred for a clinical screening or an assessment, or give you some idea whether someone might need some of the sort of adaptations that Simone was talking about around memory prompts and that sort of stuff. Now, we've got a couple of questions here about other substance use, so effects on a baby when a parent uses methamphetamine during pregnancy and other drug use. Yes, there are effects, and often that's complicated by polydrug use, so we might just put those aside for a minute. But again, some of those techniques that Simone has talked about in adapting your service delivery around people who might have different types of brain injury or cognitive impairment will also help across a range of different settings and in a range of different contexts as well. So, Simone, this is one for you, and a very good question because I know the answer's not so straightforward. What levels of alcohol use during pregnancy would potentially lead to FASD, John is asking?
Okay, so it is a tricky question because obviously we don't have information on testing how much alcohol you consume, which will cause FASD. But what we do know is there are other influences that can impact the use of alcohol, such as diet, genetics, amount, frequency. So there's a lot of other information around that individual that would might contribute to causing FASD. But we do know that 1 in 13 pregnancies exposed to alcohol will result in FASD. Hopefully that sort of answers the question. It's a bit of a tricky one because we actually don't have any data around that, but we know that small amounts of alcohol can cause FASD.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of luck in it. So, you know, that's why the message is around not drinking at all during pregnancy, because we can't guarantee you're safe. So that's kind of it. But I think too, there's a question here from Emily that goes to that issue of stigma and discrimination that James was talking about as well, and around the fear that people have around disclosures in this space. So Emily's saying child removal will be a very real fear for parents who use alcohol. And Louise has said this is a difficult issue, and better understanding all round about FASD will ultimately help with this. But I think this one connects to the last question, because we know that in Australia, you know, people use alcohol, you know, lots of people use alcohol, and sometimes, here's a surprise for you, people get pregnant without even meaning to. So it is actually possible that someone can be pregnant without knowing and can use alcohol before they even know that they're pregnant, and that if they're unlucky, that could cause harm to the baby. And I think this is a really important point in terms of the issue that Emily's raised, but also that broader issue around stigma and discrimination. There's no shame here, because you could have a few drinks with some mates before you even knew you were pregnant and end up in this situation. It's no reflection on you being a bad person. It's no reflection on your behaviours. This is just something that can happen. And that's the kind of messaging that we need to put out here. This is not about anyone being a bad mum. This is about bad luck and helping people who get caught in that as well. So of course we continue the messaging about not knowingly drinking when you're pregnant, but we need to understand there's a limit to what that can achieve in that context as well. Let's have a look here. What if the mother isn't drinking and the father drinks? Is there a chance of FASD in the child? Simone, this is a hot question.
Yep, it's a very hot question. So no, there's no evidence that that can cause FASD, but we do know that alcohol impacted sperm or affected sperm can contribute to higher, more severe sort of case of FASD if the mother also drinks. We also know that the sperm is involved in the production or the development of the placenta, and can contribute to the poor placental health. So there is still a lot of research around sperm, but it's certainly there is a responsibility from fathers as well.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. I just want to also acknowledge some comments from Jess Birch in the chat there as well, who's talking about whether answering some of those questions around whether diagnosis is important and assessment. And Jess's comment is, differentiation is deeply important with regards to support needs and healthcare. Individuals with FASD have diffuse brain and body injury. There are differences in support needs, comorbidity and propensities. Correct diagnosis is also crucial for ongoing prevention efforts. And I think that goes to what we were just talking about in terms of people who need ongoing supports that might go on beyond their contact with a particular AOD service or a particular setting. There are reasons why you might want to go the extra mile and try and get an assessment and diagnosis for someone, particularly if they're struggling in a range of different settings. So it's important to know that as well. But Simone, can you just speak briefly, and I know we're coming up on time and I want to give James another go too, but Simone, can you talk particularly about multiple diagnosis? So we know that, you know, with FASD, often people are picked up for things like ADHD, or epilepsy is another thing, that actually people might be diagnosed with things, but FASD is actually the underlying diagnosis and that hasn't been picked up. Can you just talk about what that looks like too?
Yeah, so that's quite common, and particularly sort of early developmental. There's a lot of ADHD might be diagnosed first, or autism, without sort of getting to that primary diagnosis of FASD. There are 428 comorbidities that occur with FASD. So there's lots of other conditions that may be present and may be masking the actual primary cause of FASD.
Yeah, so I think that's important too, and it also goes to some of the tells. If you're in a service and you've got someone presenting who says they've got ADHD or they have epilepsy, for instance, and then they're exhibiting some of the behaviours we've talked about today, there's a pretty decent chance that they might actually have FASD, and that could actually explain the other things too. James, having worked on this module and talked to a lot of people, particularly through the reference group, are there other things or elements in the module that you'd like to highlight at this point before we close up?
Yeah, I think the module really steps through a lot of the experiences of somebody living with FASD and talks through some of those impacts that which Simone highlighted in her presentation. But I think what the module is really great because it steps you through all those steps that typically happen in an AOD service, from your intake to your screening to your onward referral. So there's really aspects for everyone in there, no matter what part of the system you work in, whether you're a harm reduction worker who might be working on a needle syringe program, or you're in a residential service and you're managing a group. There's stuff in there that can apply no matter what part of the system you work in, and as well as people who might come into contact with AOD clients, say in the justice system, out of home care, where those population cohorts cross over. So even though we've termed it sort of the AOD workforce, I think it's also really useful for other workforces who might come into contact with people who do seek AOD treatment. So I think that's another really important aspect just to highlight there. And our audience list today kind of highlights that there is a real interest in FASD. I know we've got people from justice and out of home care and disability and mental health. So we really are spanning a whole system of support services there.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think that fits nicely with what I'm going to make for my closing comments. I'm just acknowledging a comment from Candice in the Q&A here. I currently work in a health centre in a prison and have been trying to educate officers on FASD, what to look for and how to support prisoners who have been diagnosed with FASD or are suspected of having FASD. And I've got to say that this workshop is designed in a way that it's inclusive of those needs, and the module would be just as helpful if you were working in a custodial setting, if you're working in a care and protection setting, if you're working in family and community services. So please feel free to share because these are huge issues, and particularly when you're looking at community corrections, things like compliance with appointments is huge in terms of probation and parole. If you've got a client who's agreeing to come to things and they're not turning up, this is something that might need to be considered. And Simone's point in her presentation about engaging with support people to help people, get prompts and be reminded about appointments is just as relevant whether you're talking about custodial settings, community corrections, or even Centrelink mutual obligation requirements. People are going to forget appointments if they don't have someone else helping and prompting them along the way. Now, last one, Jasmine, who can diagnose FASD? Well, clinicians can, but it's sometimes hard to get hold of specialist clinicians who can do it, which is why NOFASD Australia can help you with that, or the FASD Hub that we flipped up the details of earlier has a list of clinicians who can do it. So that's where you need to phone a friend. So today has been more about the little tweaks you can do in terms of your everyday service delivery and work that will help your services be more inclusive of people with FASD and indeed with other brain-based injuries. But sometimes you are going to need to phone a friend. And if you need to do that, NOFASD Australia is here to help. And the FASD Hub also has a list of clinicians who can help you. So I've been a bad chair. We're 3 minutes over. I'm going to close it out. But just so you know, all of the resources will go up on our website. That's www.aadc.org.au. We're going to put up a video of this event on our website afterwards as well, so you can share it with friends that might have missed the event. And please feel free to be in touch if you need more detailed information anywhere. But thank you. Thanks to everyone for your interest in this. The last thing I want to share is a pretty shocking statistic, but goes to why we care about this as well. I was shocked to learn when I first got involved in this that the average life expectancy of someone with FASD is 34 years. 34 years. And that's about deaths of misadventure. People don't die of FASD, they die of overdose. they die of suicide, they die deaths of misadventure. And that's shocking. And a lot of these people are being impacted without even ever having a diagnosis, but they're coming in contact with the services that we run. So that's why learning about FASD and knowing how to respond to it and knowing how you can go for help is so desperately important. So thanks, everyone. I know you've got to log it on. We really appreciate you coming along today. See ya.